Welcome to the Warships Podcast with your host, Kelorn, Vanessaira, and Aerroon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Warships Podcast. Regretfully, Kelorn had a loss in the family and could not join us this week, but we are joined by No Zoup for you, who came in to help us out for a week. No Zoup, how have you been?
I have been doing pretty good. A lot of life events going on outside of Warships, just at work and at home. Some of them good, some of them bad. I've got a very, very sick kitty right now, which is kind of stressing my wife out. But outside of that, I know that's nothing that compares to what Kelorn's going through right now. So it's somewhat bittersweet that I'm actually here today. So all the best for him right now and his family during this time period.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely, I know a lot of us have been super crazy busy lately, but thank you for taking some time to join us here and help out on this week's episode. So for our first topic, we wanted to cover a new line that has been talked about by Wargaming, and that is the French destroyers. That is a complete tier of destroyers for the French line, and they have some interesting kind of tidbits to them, kind of echoing what they have on some of the premium destroyers that we've seen. What do you guys feel so far with the reveal of these destroyers?
So first and foremost, I'm actually a little disappointed. And I say that because I was really hoping for some Italian battleships or, some other line other than French destroyers. And I think it's kind of interesting that they're choosing to go with another line of destroyers right now, given the issues that we're having with aircraft carriers and destroyers. And, it's possible those get wrinkled out before the French destroyers come out. But I suspect probably not. But then again, if these destroyers are going to be exactly what we think they're going to be, aircraft carriers might not even be an issue. It might be the perfect time for French destroyers, and they're absolutely insane speeds. So, yeah, it is what it is. It's another line of ships, another line for us to test, to look at. I wasn't a huge fan of the other French destroyers before. They had their speed, which was kind of a quirk with them, but outside of that, Le Terrible, the name says it all right there, at least in my opinion. So we'll see. But for me, I was hoping for other things.
Actually, I guess I should list what they have going for them. So the French destroyers will be destroyers without the smokescreen, as I understand. However, their engine boost will be plus 20%, and they will come with a main battery reload consumable, which accelerates the reload of main caliber guns by 50% when you use it. Now, their AP is supposed to be fairly good, allowing you to citadel light cruisers from 8 to 10 kilometers. However, their torpedo range, at least according to this, is going to average at around 8 kilometers, but they will be really, really fast, apparently up to 75 knots. And so I think what's interesting about these destroyers is that they will be so fast that I think they will actually slightly break aiming because it says that they will get up to 55 knots, which is even faster than the Le Terrible does right now. Now, to actually address the Le Terrible, the Tier 8 one, which is the Le Fantasque, I don't know how to pronounce that, she will, at least looking at the stats side by side, she will literally just be better than the Le Terrible, which makes me kind of question why we have, the premium version in the first place. But what's cool about them is that they have 139mm caliber, and I guess that's what makes the AP shells more powerful. So they'll end up being kind of like, they'll be kind of like the Soviet destroyers, like the Khabarovsk, where you end up fighting a lot, which is going to be interesting, but it does make me wonder, whether they will actually be better than a Khabarovsk, and if they are, will this invalidate the Khabarovsk instead?
Well, now that we've actually gotten into the what they're capable of, which probably should have started off with first, and that's my fault right there. The way I'm seeing these ships, And I don't know if this is the concept of wargaming intended, and obviously we don't know the reload for these ships right now, how fast they're going to be firing. It seems like these ships are going to be designed to just do quick strikes. For instance, it might not be able to outgun Haragumo or Khabarovsk just on paper, but when you go in for a quick strike and you activate that reload boost for a short time, you will be able to before, unloading as much as you can and pulling out of the battle. So I think it's going to create a play style that we just have not seen before with destroyers, which I do find interesting and somewhat intriguing. Are you kind of getting this feel as well?
Well, I look at them and I look at the speed and I look at essentially what they're putting down stat-wise. And honestly, it seems more like light cruisers with, no citadel and just, zipping around the map, just shooting away and dropping off their torpedoes. And it's funny that you look at the speed that they say that these torpedoes are going to go, and it's like, well, they kind of have to, because if not, they might run into their own torpedoes because they're just going so bloody fast. And I think some of these destroyers are going to be faster than some USN sea mines. So it's definitely going to be silly. The problem still, I feel, ultimately with like these destroyers and some of the others is just in the current meta, at least I feel on the NA server, if a destroyer is firing, like everyone's going to be shooting back at them. And it's not like they have a crazy health pool to be able to take, just this constant run and gun and shoot. And that's kind of how I felt with the other French destroyers, is like, if I tried to run and gun or shoot or something like that, it wasn't really effective. Not like with the Soviet destroyers, where at least you got the heal and you could take a lot and then just heal back.
I found that to be the same though. That is, the HP pool seems low for the fact that she's going to be, well, she doesn't have a smoke, so she can't really just go and disappear. And the worst part is that her firepower seems to be rather lacking. We actually, in the blog post, we actually do have the reload value, which is at 7 seconds, 8 guns, and the maximum HE damage is 2000, AP is 2700. This actually puts her, well, on par with Shimakaze in terms of damage output without using reload booster. When you use reload booster, though, it gets up there, and I'm sure that you can use it to fight destroyers and, have some decent fights and all. I just don't know if the ship could actually stand up to close range fight against other DDs. I think you'll just lose.
So that brings up an even more important question. What is the purpose, or what are the purposes of this destroyer? I mean, you've got insanely fast but very, very short range torpedoes. You've got slow reloading guns that are kind of middling with their damage. I don't know who they are trying to attract here with this. And I guess there's speed demons out there that love speed, but the problem with speed and ships that go that fast, you can run out of open water very, very quickly. And on maps that are more prone to having islands littered throughout them, players that aren't as skilled at navigating by looking at their mini map are really going to run into trouble. And I suspect for the first couple weeks of these ships, we're going to see a lot of beached players just getting hammered by the enemy.
I'm not actually so sure about that, because, well, with speed boost, they will accelerate really, really quickly. And I actually suspect that running aground accidentally might be useful to them, because it messes up the shot of the enemy. And because your acceleration is so high, you can probably start moving again really, really, really quickly. I do agree, though, that you can run out of map very quickly, and that can end up being quite disadvantageous. But I wanted to talk about the way the aiming system works. So the way the aim works in this game is that it basically locks on and tries to predict where the enemy is going to be based on, it takes into account your aiming slightly. But on the other hand, it does give you like an aimbot where it predicts where the opposing ship that you have locked on is going to be when the shells should arrive, roughly. This is particularly important when you are trying to figure out the distance or range, because it's very difficult to actually correctly assess range in this game, and the game has to help with that. Now, that's fine. However, the problem is that when you have a ship that goes really, really, really fast, the prediction has to, put the spot where your shell should land at really far from the ship. And since it takes a good 10 seconds to fire at the target at long range, what can happen is that if the target actually turns and starts maneuvering, and they are fast enough with the maneuvering, your shells can simply miss due to the fact that the game predicts the position of the opponent to be wrong. And we see this with Habarovsk. This is the reason why the really fast DDs are difficult to hit when they're going like full speed, because they can simply change their heading slightly, and they will be so much off course that all of your shells miss. And it's going to be even worse with the 2 knots faster, 55 knot French destroyers. And I think that's going to be interesting to see whether this breaks it aiming even further.
As long as they help me get away from midway dive bombers, I am perfectly happy with their speed and am willing to sacrifice aiming. No, I'm
no, they won't.
I know. I don't think anything can escape midway dive bombers right now. But that's a completely different issue for another time. But no, I agree exactly with what you've said. So I'm very interested in getting my hands on these and actually testing them out to see, just everything about them.
Yeah, I'm really interested to test them and kind of see it. I do ultimately agree. This would have been, I feel, the perfect time to release an Italian line, but I guess, they have the French destroyers ready, and we know that Wargaming, they have a modeling department. They model the ships, and kind of when those ships are ready, then, that's kind of how they bring them out and get them to us. So it looks like, they had that or have been working on this and are getting it ready. So we'll be testing it soon, and hopefully we'll be able to bring some information and talk about them in the not too distant future. And speaking of ship lines, we have changes to the Soviet battleships, and we have a surprise new one with the Slava coming in. I don't know. What do you think?
So I am somewhat perplexed by this move right here. And Wargaming, I think it was on their dev blog, they came out and said rather than give 2 different calibers on the Kremlin, the Kreml, or however you pronounce it, they decided to just make a completely different ship at tier 10. So you're going to have a tech tree split at tier 10, and only for tier 10 you'll have the Slava and you'll have the Kremlin. And the Slava is going to have the smaller caliber guns, the 406 or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't have it up in front of me right now. It's not going to have those 18-inch shells that the Kremlin has, but they state that the ships are going to be very similar, except for the fact that the Slava, with its smaller guns, is going to be more of a sniper-y type of battleship. So that'll be the one with a little better range. I guess the Sigma might be better as well, though I want to say that I saw something that didn't look that impressive on it, but I might be imagining that. But yeah, you're going to have one ship that's going to be a brawler with giant guns that gets up close and personal. Then you're going to have one ship that hangs a little further back and has slightly better aim, but can't do quite the amount of damage that the Kremlin can. So personally, again, if there's no huge armor changes or propulsion changes or AA changes, I just don't know why they're doing this.
Well, I mean, it's a Soviet battleship, and I assume that Soviet battleships are going to be fairly popular on the Russian server. And because of that, I think it actually makes a lot of sense from maybe not the gameplay perspective, but at least from a business perspective, to release a Soviet battleship like that offers a different style of play, because I'm sure people will be interested in it. Rather than playing a Conqueror, they might want to play this instead. Now, it does bother me a bit, though.
So why, and let me just ask you real quick, why a tech tree split then? If they think it's going to be good business, why not just release one of them as a premium ship, or make it available for XP or whatever else, coal, steel, whatever? Why a separate tech tree ship? I mean,
That's a good point, but I assume it's because to make it more accessible. I think at least on the Russian server, these ships will be there to get people to play the game. Rather than to sell stuff itself. But I mean, I'm just guessing, we can't know this kind of stuff.
Well, and people will likely spend free XP, and I'm sure they'll make a little, I hate bringing up the business side of it, but I'm sure they'll profit off of it a little bit too, as people decide to cash in doubloons or whatever else to get that free XP to unlock one or the other. So, it's not like they're throwing a free ship out there. There are benefits to it. So,
yeah. Although I assume the reason why they split that tier 10 is because they probably had a harder time finding something appropriate for tier 9. Or perhaps, they simply had one extra ship left over and were like, well, what are we going to do with this one? Who knows? I don't like the fact, though, that she is going to be more accurate. I kind of wish that we had, in general, I really like the idea behind the Soviet battleships, where they are more accurate at closer range and less accurate at longer range. In fact, I wish we had this kind of a rule on all of the battleships, where you would be encouraged to go closer, because when ships go closer, I think the games end up being more interesting.
Well, and from what I've heard about, the Russian server, they like to get into the mix. They like to brawl. It's like these ships were hand tailored to the Russian server, and just playing the Kremlin, I enjoyed it a lot. I mean, I don't think they're overpowered at all. I think they're well balanced in the fact that they light up easily and catch fire easily, and you cannot sit back in them because you will get lit on fire continually. It forces you to get in the mix, and they're a lot of fun.
I agree with that. I like that a lot. But I mean, like, overall, when battleships push, the games, in my opinion, end up being more interesting. Not just for the battleships, but for everyone. Because, first of all, the cruisers now actually have a target that's coming closer to them. But the cruisers also have to start disengaging because, hey, if they get too close to a battleship, they're toast. On top of that, destroyers can actually torpedo without having 20-kilometer Shimakaze torpedoes, because a ship isn't moving away and it's not sitting behind an island, meaning that there's a possibility to hit the torpedoes on them. Now, this, in my opinion, makes the game much more interesting, and obviously it makes the game dynamic, and so I wish we had this kind of mechanic on all of the battleships. However, I'll take it just on the Soviet battleships for now. I just find it kind of sad that they're making a more sniper-esque Soviet battleship. I kind of wish that they, hadn't done that.
Yeah, what are your thoughts, Vanessa?
Well, I look at a lot of these changes and I see, reductions in firing ranges on a lot of them. I see changes to detection values, and they definitely want to push, the brawling aspect of these ships, and I do agree with Aerroon. I do feel, that these ships should be brawling. And, you definitely need a class of ship out there that can kind of go in and push the battle and kind of push us into battle. Because we see, so much, at least on the NA server, of some rather stagnant gameplay. And, just everyone just kind of clumping up or sitting off in the distance and lobbing shells at each other. And this could be a welcome change, but you also have to make other changes to, if you're going to have them tank, then you really need to be able to kind of go in and do your thing. It just, I really want to see how the meta accepts these ships, at least on the NA server. I'm sure on the CIS that these ships are going to be, a wild success, and, just the play style over there is probably going to be really good. I did see some of them, like they got their speed knocked down with some of these ships. So that's a little frustrating if you kind of want people to kind of move in and kind of charge in, if you will, if your ships are going a little slower. But I mean, ultimately, we just need to test and see. Ultimately, how everything feels.
Yeah, I want to throw one more thing in there before we move on to the next topic, just going along with the whole more brawler-type battleships. I really think that the Massachusetts was probably the greatest thing to happen to battleships when it came out in a long time, and at the very least, the USN line. And I really wish that we saw a tech tree split on the USN battleship line, bringing in ships like the USS Tennessee with more of a focus on those long range secondaries. And maybe, if they do that, implement this Soviet style type where they're more accurate the closer in, and just create a class for players to say, hey, I've tried this sit back and sniper type stuff and all these other battleships. You've given me other US ships now that seem like they could be brawlers. And I think that could be a lot of fun, and it could garner a lot of interest as well.
You mean the USS should have been USS Washington?
Yeah, I know that's a very, very sore spot.
I know. I had to throw that. I completely agree with you. The Massachusetts feels really, really good. It's such a good ship in the game right now, especially for the North American meta. And I know we kind of harp on that a little bit, but I completely agree. I wish there would be a split there and we could get, a line. And I'm sorry, but I think that the U.S. line of ships, the secondary battery armaments overall, I feel should be improved, especially as how the game is kind of changed and evolved. I think if, the USN battleships are supposed to be kind of the run-of-the-mill, average, then, with the way that other lines have kind of come in, maybe their ranges and stuff should be adjusted and improved a little. We don't have the luxuries or the benefits of, kind of being that stealthy, get in close and wait for your shot, especially with the prevalence of carriers now. And I feel, some of the things that kind of really were staples about USN battleships have kind of, maybe gone down a little.
It would be interesting to do that. And on the split, I know people are probably thinking, well, what are you going to do about tier 10? I would say take a ship like the USS New Jersey and throw that at tier 10 and give it some perks that would make it worthy of tier 10, maybe a boost in its armor, but coupled with extreme secondary range. I mean, you can work with it. That's what I'm trying to get at. There are ways you can do it. So I really hope Wargaming does that, but I suspect if they do, it's not going to be for a long time because there's just so much other content that they're trying to get through right now.
Yeah, they could do something silly like do a Kentucky or Illinois, take the rear turret and replace it with the missile batteries or something.
What they could do is give them like a standard, like the 11.7 secondary range or 6, and then give them a scout plane that increases secondary range or something like that, for a short duration. That way you could activate them if you want to, and the secondaries can go ham from a really long range.
I mean, it doesn't really even need to be like 11 kilometers, but something on average that is greater than, or at least in between, like the averages of the other lines. And you look at like the French and German battleships, I feel you could put your secondary range somewhere, in a median or average, if you will, with the option of, hey, if you really want to adjust or improve this, you can. And I mean, it's not like the turret angles on USN secondaries are that great anyway. So I don't know, maybe you could trade off and do, and I do like the idea with the spot plane there too.
Regarding secondaries, look at the Bismarck. And I know the Bismarck has not aged that well, but for a time, and especially for myself, I loved that ship. I had an absolute blast in that ship, and a full secondary build Bismarck was just an absolute lot of fun. Over time, that's kind of changed, though, because of just everything being added to the game. But for a while, secondary builds were the way to go. I mean, they were viable and they were fun. And I'd love to get back to that at some point in the future. And I'm hoping these Russian battleships, not at least with the secondaries, but just getting up close and personal, kind of bring back that brawling mentality that I feel we're so often missing from these rounds, where it just seems like, you pinwheel, everybody sits back, and one team just gets steamrolled. So maybe at some point we'll get there.
I think what kind of kills the Bismarck secondary thingy is the fact that, first of all, she doesn't have divided by 4 penetration on these secondaries. And second of all, well, tier 8 ends up in tier 10 games so much that you just end up as a punching bag, and that's why I think it's not quite as much fun. However, if you play the Grosse Ko first with a full secondary build and go like IFHE, it's nuts. I mean, I've had games where my secondaries did 88,000 damage. Just the secondaries alone. I'm not talking like fires or anything like that. I'm just talking alpha damage. And I think that's really cool.
I don't play my Kurfürst a lot right now, so given that, I might actually take your suggestion right there and use it as a, just go out and have fun with that type of setup ship.
And it was actually really interesting. Friedrich der Grosse ended up being really powerful during the last ranked season because of a secondary build, apparently anyway. It was kind of surprising to me. But we were talking about the Massachusetts. What do you guys think is the most misspelled word in the state of Massachusetts?
Well, I actually know the answer, but that's because you talked about it in Discord.
I don't know. I'm curious now. What is it?
Well, Vanessa, would you like to enlighten us?
Yeah, it actually is Massachusetts.
Really? Yeah, I figured it probably was.
Yeah.
According to Google Trends anyway, it's kind of surprising.
It's not like a word like Mississippi where there's an easy way to remember it, like MISSISSIPPI. I mean, Massachusetts is kind of one of those weird ones.
Yeah, and I remember he'd linked that and I was like, wow, that's really funny. Speaking of U.S. topics, what do you guys feel about the USS Benham, a Benham-class destroyer at Tier 9?
I feel that I am a little upset because I still want Alan Sumner in the game. Seriously though, I am happy to see this ship in here. We've got a new ship class. We've got a new high tier USN destroyer, and that's something to rejoice about because I like all things USN, and this fits that bill. And not only that, it's got a very unique torpedo setup with those eight launchers on both sides, which, it's like, I want to say it's like Clemson's spiritual successor right here, but at higher tier. Of course, Clemson doesn't have to deal with radar. Benham will, but still, this is really one of the premiums out there that we've heard about that has kind of got me excited. So I welcome this with open arms.
Yeah, I think the torpedoes are amazing. I mean, look at it. There's 16 of them, and they have a massive maximum range of 9.2 kilometers. They deal an impressive 16,000 damage, and they go an insane 55 knots at tier 9. I mean, it's not like we're introducing a destroyer line that goes literally faster than that or anything, right?
I get your sarcasm here. I really do. And yes, those stats are somewhat underwhelming for where it's going to be fighting primarily, which kind of makes me wonder what we're going to be looking at with its AA capabilities and if it's going to bring anything else to the table. Because like you said, even though it has 16 torps, of which, don't forget, you're going to have to swing around to the other side, from port to starboard or vice versa to fire those other 8. There are some definite concerns with this ship as well.
Yeah, looking at those stats, it is kind of silly. I also think it's kind of silly that, this is coming out at tier 9, and the class of ship that succeeded this was the Sims, which is at tier 7. And I know it's just semantics and silliness, but yeah, this I'm going to be interested to test this, but 9.2 kilometers? I mean, at 55 knots, why not give it like the 13.6 of USS Black? Like, at least, give it some range so that if you try and launch a spread of torps from one side and try and turn around and do that, you're going to probably be in detection range of whatever it is you're trying to do, trying to pull that maneuver. It's going to be interesting to see, especially at tier 9.
Yeah, and let me clarify. While I am extremely excited about this ship, it's only because it's a USN destroyer. I am not excited about everything we've just mentioned right now, and it really does actually worry me. And when I first heard this ship was coming to the game, I didn't know what tier it was going to be, and just knowing the history of this ship and who its successors were and who its predecessors were, I figured it was probably going to be a tier 8 ship, which would still suck because you're going to be facing primarily 9s and 10s. But I didn't think it was going to be a tier 9. And I suspect, or at least I'm hoping, after we get done with testing, that might change, or at least some of the attributes, because on paper, I don't think it'll appeal to anyone outside of the most ardent United States Navy collectors out there, because I don't think it's going to bring anything to the table worth playing, or at least worth the headache and the heartache of trying to get it to work at that tier, unless it's just got something amazing with it, like 5-minute long smoke or super British heel or something like that, something that'll make it worth it. But I don't think it has any of that that I know of. So yeah, there are some concerns with this ship, some very big concerns.
I also think that they should significantly increase the range of the torpedoes, although I think what they're afraid of is that if they increase the range of the torpedoes, what ends up happening is that the destroyer is going to just sail in a circle like for the entire game, because I looked at the torpedo reload. It's 98 seconds, and that doesn't seem too crazy, right? Except you have to consider that this is a tier 9 destroyer, meaning that it gets access to the last slot, and if you have a 98-second reload, wasn't the last slot for torpedoes minus 15% on reload, and then you have access to the commander skill, which is another minus 10%, and then you also have adrenaline rush. And considering you have torpedoes on both sides, I think what would end up happening is that you sail along, you launch torpedoes on the other side, you turn in to launch torpedoes on the other side, and you do a circle. And then when you're finished the circle, your torpedoes on the first side are already reloaded, so you launch them again, and then you turn again, and then you launch on the other side, and a circle.
I'm gonna need to correct you right there, because this is really how it works. You're going to try to launch torpedoes on one side. You're going to start your turn. Midway dive bombers are going to find you. You're going to try to escape them. You're going to lose half your health. Then you're going to go run and hide and probably not come back out and do anything.
So, sounds unrealistic. I mean, in a more realistic scenario, midway dive bombers come in and then the game ends for you.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't even think you get to fire those first set of torpedoes. So, and that's another concern with another high tier destroyer. I mean, are you going to give it good AA? Because right now you kind of need to give it good AA, because if it doesn't have good AA, even if it does have good AA, it's still going to get hounded if there's carriers in the round. So I think they're going to be hard pressed to find some significant appeal for this right now, outside of people like me who just love all things American, which that might not even be enough for me to want to play this ship.
Speaking of AA, they did come out in a blog post about AA changes, which would be coming out in the 8.2 patch.
Yep, the overlapping AA has been tinkered with. It's been fixed. It's going to make it a lot more pleasant for aircraft carriers that find themselves just getting their planes eaten apart. But Aerroon, I know you have. I know you've got a different view on this. So what do you think about this?
Well, first I would like to actually talk about the Benham's anti-air. You see, the anti-air on that ship is going to be amazing. It's going to definitely ward off midway dive bombers. I mean, we have the numbers here. The long-range anti-air is from 0.9 kilometers, 5.8 kilometers, so basically any of the anti-air that actually matters. It has a massive 2 flak bubbles that deal 1470 damage each, and a continuous damage per second of 67. I'm sure that is going to ward off all of the midway planes, and there will be no issues whatsoever. But moving on to the actual anti-air changes. So basically, this is something I have been a proponent of for a long time. I don't know where they got the idea from to actually make this change, but even back when we had the RTS CVs and had no idea about what the change was going to be to the planes, I had put out the idea that one of the big problems with playing carriers is the fact that when you play carriers, what ends up happening is that the enemy teams end up blobbing up, and the problem with it is that their overlapping anti-airs end up being so powerful that you basically are unable to do anything. You just sit back and wait until they spread out. If they don't spread out, tough luck. You don't do anything that game. And it was frustrating to play as a CV against that because it kept happening over and over again. Now, of course, there are other things that you have to keep in mind when you tinker with these kinds of things, but that was the basic idea. It's just frustrating to play against. And so something I suggested a long time ago was the idea that if you have overlapping anti-air, it shouldn't sum up like in a linear fashion. So let's say you're in an anti-air bubble from, let's say, a Des Moines. Let's say it does 100 damage, and from another Des Moines that does also 100 damage. The idea would be that you don't then take 200 damage per second when you're in the bubbles of both of them, but instead you take, let's say, 150 damage. Although, that's the basic idea. So you take less damage per second than you would when, it would be individually. The idea is that this would encourage CVs to not have to bring all of the planes together, because remember, back then we had multiple squadrons, and one of the reasons why I wanted to drop all of the squadrons at once was so that you don't waste any planes, and that was very useful back then. However, if we have the change now, I don't think it's quite as good, because first of all, CVs are insanely strong right now. Like, ridiculously strong, particularly HE dive bombers. But there's a few other things. First of all, anti-air range was significantly nerfed. You might think that, hey, anti-air range, okay, what's the big deal? It went from, the longest range went from 8.6 kilometers to, 6 kilometers? And most anti-air ranges ended up going from 7.2 to around 5 to 6. It doesn't seem like a big deal. Until you consider the fact that anti-air is in a circle. If you calculate the area that anti-air covered before, you end up at a huge difference in the area it covers. And so we end up with a lot less overlapping anti-air bubbles right now, which means that the flak or the overlapping portions aren't as big of an issue. And couple that with the fact that planes or CVs are really, really powerful right now and anti-air struggles, I'm not sure this is actually a good thing to do right now. I think it would have been great way back when, but right now, I am very, very skeptical whether this is a good thing.
Yeah, I understand your concerns, and I'm kind of ambivalent at this point. The carriers are just changing so much with these hot fixes, and I think there's other issues that I really rather have seen be taken care of first. For an example, we keep throwing Midway up there, but I really would like to see the fall damage of the bombs taken. So I agree with you. I don't know if this is the right time.
Actually, I guess I should mention the way it's calculated, because they do outline it here. So the damage of the anti-air zones on... so if you have a squadron and, they calculate which anti-air zones affect the squadron. Then they calculate a reduction factor for each individual anti-air zone depending on the number of ships that are firing and what kind of damage they do. And then the damage is summed up and they take into account the reduction factor. And apparently... the factor is the greatest when the bigger the difference in damage, the smaller the reduction between the anti-airs. But the numbers they gave, for example, is that if you had 2 ships, then their anti-air efficiency is 178% together. If you have 3 ships, it's 250%, 4 ships, 317%, 5 ships, 382%. So if you had 5 ships with overlapping anti-air, it would actually be less than 4 ships right now. So the difference isn't going to be massive. Like if you struggle with let's say in the anti-air of a Republique, you're still going to struggle even with the changes, but it's not going to be quite as bad. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. However, again, because of how strong CVs have felt to me recently, I've played them quite a bit now, I'm not sure whether this is a good idea to implement, at least right now.
I think what it's going to do is it's going to create kind of a Band-Aid. It's going to help the players that are having issues right now and find themselves just making poor choices and getting their planes mowed down. But it's going to make someone like you and your play a little bit stronger because you know it much more in depth, and you're already doing good in carriers. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, I agree exactly with what you're saying regarding this change.
Vanessa, what do you think of it?
Well, I don't know. I just have to take a wait and see, because there's been so many changes with the game with regard to carriers and AA, and I know I'm not the only person who is frustrated with everything, and it's, it is what it is. It just there's change, there's adjustments, and trying to learn what is going to make you more effective and what's going to try and be the best for the team. And it's difficult because of all these changes, and just have to wait and see what Wargaming comes out with on this.
Hey, I heard we got some new camouflage coming out for the Yamato.
Oh, you mean the one that looks amazing?
Oh yeah, the Kobayashi camouflage that makes it look like it's a tie-in with Disney's Dumbo, or it makes the ship look like a helicopter. So for those of you who haven't seen it yet, remember the Roma and remember the giant beer can. Well, I guess one of the things about these ships, Kobayashi adds his own little signature, and on this, he took the radar rangefinders on the top and just made them gigantic.
Does this mean Yamato with this camo will have radar?
Maybe. One could only hope. Silliness aside, though, we do have a couple other ships that were talked about in the dev blog along with the USS Benham. We have the Tier 10 Yoshino, a Japanese cruiser. We have the Tier 7 Udachi, a Japanese destroyer. We have a Tier 5 French destroyer, the Sirocco, and a Tier 8 French cruiser as well, the Bayard. Have you guys looked at these and anything that kind of piques your interest with these premiums?
Well, I think definitely Udachi is going to be probably the most popular of these upcoming ships, just because, poi. I mean, I'm sure there are a ton of weebs out there that are extremely excited that this ship is finally coming into the game, and I suspect that this ship is going to be it's going to do very, very well for Wargaming because of that. As far as whether or not I'm excited about it, I'm kind of indifferent. I'm more interested in Yoshino. So yeah, that's what I've got my eyes on right now out of all the random premiums coming out.
Speaking of Yoshino, it has torpedoes. It was basically my biggest complaint with Azuma, and here it is with torpedoes.
Does that make you happy? Like really, really happy? Are you going to play her?
12 kilometers. Like, seriously.
Initially, Udachi, while the poi thing is cool and all, the initial torpedo range really left me wanting at 9 kilometers. It seemed very disappointing. I mean, the gunfire is going to be good and all, but I think we kind of expected more from the torpedoes. But from what I understand, they actually changed the torpedo range, but I don't really know how certain this is, though, right now. So I guess we'll have to see whether that's the case. Although I have been reading about how apparently she might get the 15-kilometer torpedoes that we had way back when. I just don't know exactly how. I guess we'll, have to see what the test ends up being.
Right now they
sorry.
show the 15. Sorry, go ahead.
I blacked out. Are we talking about Udachi or Yoshino?
Yeah,
Yes.
Udachi.
Yeah,
And at the moment on the dev block, it does show 15 kilometers in the torp. Granted, they're 57 knots, so they're almost sea mines, but not quite. But yeah, it's interesting, especially at that tier.
That's enough range to cause some issues, though. I mean, you're not gonna land a ton of them, but that's enough to range to catch random stuff here and there, kind of like Sims.
I think we've played against these torpedoes before. Fibiki, anyone? Tier 8?
Very
She
much
used to have 15-kilometer torpedoes.
Well, we do know that the French destroyers aren't going to have to worry about these torpedoes because they can pretty much outrun them.
Yeah, unless they make contact at the. I wonder. I suppose that will be the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object.
I think the torpedo is going to win that trade.
Yeah, I think so too.
Although I have to say that I have recently been playing with Strefs together, and we have been playing some Shimakaze games with 20-kilometer torpedoes, and surprisingly, it has been quite fun. You see, on many of the tier 10 maps, for example, Mountain Range or Ocean, I guess, or Sleeping Giant, you have these places where you have these very nice and open torpedo lanes, and you can drop your 20-kilometer torpedoes into that, and very often ships just catch torpedoes really completely randomly. And it gets even better with the CVs because, CVs really like standing still, so even if you sometimes miss on the target you're torpedoing, your torpedoes might still hit the CV at the back. Although 15 or 20-kilometer torpedoes do have the downside that sometimes when you get behind the enemy and torpedo the enemy, it you see, when your torpedoes miss the enemy and you're behind them, they end up going towards your team, which might lead to some trouble. And I believe Fubuki or these Udachi torpedoes are going to be somewhat similar.
I guess we'll find out pretty soon.
Yeah, totally. As looking over some of the other shit, we've got the Sirocco tier 5, and just another French, and I guess maybe you've got all these the French line coming out, and gonna want to add more premiums to kind of supplement along with that line. It's got 9 kilometers in the torps and 60 knot torps, so maybe a little bit different from the rest of the line where they're doing shorter range faster. This is kind of a trade-off, a little bit longer range but shorter or less speed. But I notice the reload doesn't seem too bad on that either. But any thoughts on the Bayard there? Another possibly something different from the Charles Martel? I know a lot of people like that ship.
Yeah, I like the Charles Martel a lot, so having one very similar to that would obviously appeal to me. I haven't seen too much about the ship, but I'm honestly kind of getting a little overwhelmed right now with just the sheer amount of ships that we've got in the pipeline right now. I mean, you've got the French destroyers coming out, you've got all these premiums, and I kind of wish they were staggering these out a little while longer, which makes me wonder, if they've got even more on the horizon once they get this out of the way. It's almost like they've gone into just overdrive with ship production, which, far be it from me to look a gift horse in the mouth and complain about an abundance of ships out there. But it just seems like we have a lot on the horizon right now. And I worry that, I don't think it'll burn players out, but I'm worried that it's going to kind of create a sensory overload, and players just I guess for me, I want players to make wise choices with how they spend their money and which ships they get. And when you have this many out here, that might be harder to do for some players that, don't have the ability to just go out there and buy every single ship out there. So it's very interesting with the amount of ships that we have coming, I think.
So what you're saying is we're in a world of ship.
Yes, things are getting really shippy right now.
I would like to add, though, that I think the problem might seem worse for the community contributors than it ends up being for the actual players, because, our problem, maybe not the problem, but privilege, is that we get to test these ships, and what ends up happening is that because there's a whole bunch of ships being tested at the same time, even though they might be released in a staggered manner, what ends up happening is that it seems to us as though there's constantly new ships with new additions and changes and all that. And because of that, it might seem worse for us in this sense than it actually is. Because, hey, most of the players don't touch the Soviet battleships, at least for quite a while now, right? But we're testing them anyway. And this, I think, might be the reason why we feel overwhelmed compared to what the average player might feel. And so I think the issue isn't quite as bad for them.
Yeah, and that's a good point there, because we were testing Alaska among other ships. And how long did it take Alaska to actually make it into the game? So, and to add to you also, yes, it is very much a privilege, and it's a huge privilege, and one that we try to do the best with to give you all, the listeners and viewers, the most informed outlook on these ships as we can. So, and when you've got so many ships here, the last thing we want to do is rush our opinions, because we want you all to make informed opinions on which ships you want to purchase, especially, if there are, I doubt there's going to be 5 premiums out at the same time. But you might have an instance where there are 2 premiums out at the same time. And sometimes it's an easy choice for some players. Some might just be, for example, you've got Udachi and you've got the Binham out at the exact same time. Some players are going to say, well, I like U.S. ships, so I'm going to go with the Binham. Or some of them will take a more in-depth look, and they're going to rely on what people say about it. They're going to look at the stats. They're going to say, well, this is going to help me more because it has better AA. So, yes, it is a privilege, and our goal is to help you all make informed choices.
So I hate to interrupt you, but there's an iceberg dead ahead, and we might need to change course.
Yes. The Titanic is going to sink again, over and over and over again. This is one of the. This is another one of those dynamic. I don't want to call it weather, because obviously it's not weather, but we have dynamic weather now, and I guess we're getting dynamic terrain with these icebergs. And for those of you who haven't seen this yet, there are going to be actual icebergs, and it's only one map only, I think, as of right now, but there is going to be destructible or destroyable terrain. So if you're hiding behind one of these little areas on the map that is an iceberg, and you're happy in your Worcester or something else, and you're just lobbing HE shell after HE shell over these islands, you got to be careful, because a big bad battleship is going to take its 16-inch shells and just completely destroy your cover, and you're going to be wide out in the open. Or at least that's what I think Wargaming is aiming for. Whether or not it plays out that way, I don't know. Personally, I don't know how I feel about this. I think it's kind of cool in a way that you finally have a way to get rid of that ship that's dug in like a tick, firing HE, and you have no recourse to fire back. But another part of me also is just like, with other issues, why this, why now? But again, don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. This is something that could be cool at some point.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you guys have played the game for a while. Remember Islands of Ice way back when it had that really complex maze in one corner and there were all these islands elsewhere? And then they simplified it. The maze got smaller, there were less islands in it, and the islands changed. And then we got another change that basically removed even more of the smaller islands and moved the other ones around. And now we're getting destructible ones. And are we really heading to islands of global warming, as in we end up with ocean eventually for
Yeah, I
the ice maps?
was just gonna say it's ocean. We're just gonna get ocean. That's it.
I hate Islands of Ice anyways, so I honestly, you could nuke that map and I couldn't care less. I'm just I'm not saying I don't play well on it. I've had some really good games on it. Some rounds. I just don't like that map for some reason, and I think that shows in how many times they have tinkered with that map. It just has never been right. And I guess they're still not happy with it because of further changes. So, yeah, just remove the icebergs and make it ocean. I think that's save the time.
It does seem to be where it's heading to, because it's like, yeah, it looks like it is being nuked, almost literally.
I mean, I liked the really old Islands of Ice, the one where you could get stuck when you went into the maze of icebergs. I thought that was really cool. And I think that Islands of Ice is so different from the one we have right now, or even the one we had before, that I kind of wish they had just made it into a separate map and just made it really rare. I mean, the old one really did have some very interesting moments on it. There was the time when there wasn't one of the islands was completely invisible. I think that was a great moment back then. I guess now you can literally sink the island. I wonder if torpedoes work on it.
I was thinking the same thing, and it wasn't invisible. It was
Fighters, rocket planes. I wonder if those will work on it too.
Yeah, you don't even need icebergs to get you stuck. The islands, normal islands, will still reach out and grab you and hold you down. Had that happen the other day. It's like, really? And cost me my ship, but whatever.
Hey, when you're beached and your ship sinks, it's not a big deal, right? You end up just you just end up as a gun battery that's beached. No problem. Am I right? That's how it works in this game?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
No, I'm pretty sure you'll still sink, even though you're literally beached. Somehow, some way, they just find enough water below you that your ship just goes and falls into the abyss.
Yeah, it's funny. There is some maps where, like, you could see it's so shallow. Like, you're literally, like, in the shallows, and it's like, how does this whole ship sink? When, like, you look at the carcass, like, of a dead ship that they have as part of the map, just flavor, and like, look, that ship is like partially sunk right next to my ship, but my ship fully sinks.
Hotspot. You play that map, and right around the island or the archipelagos on the B cap. That water's that nice pristine green look that you see in the Bahamas because it's like 5 feet deep. So yeah, it is kind of funny.
And what would that mean if they ever did bring submarines into the game? Would you have like underwater parts like that you'd actually have to maneuver around? Like, oh, it's too shallow here, so if I want to go past that, I have to actually surface and then dive back down. It'd be interesting.
I suspect there would be some maps that are submarine only, like Islands of Ice. I could see being a submarine, a map that not submarine only, but the maps that submarines are limited to. I guess that's a better way to put it, because there's some maps that I just don't think are conducive to submarine play, like Hotspot, for example, with the islands in the middle. So I think your deep water maps, ocean would probably be a very good map for submarines. I'm just going to go out on a limb right there, but let's not talk about submarines. We're still trying to get through the CV rework, right?
Hey, don't worry about it. Soon, submarines will launch their planes too.
Oh God, what was it? The Type 1 or whatever. Which was the Japanese submarine that could do that? I can't remember. But yes, there is a Japanese submarine that could launch a limited amount of airplanes. So let's not put ideas in wargaming's minds right now.
The I-401 could launch torpedo bombers.
Yeah, the next up, sarcasm, we'll get the
coming soon.
The Japanese carrier line split with the hybrid battleships and the submarine carriers.
I hope not. I really hope not.
Well, with those, we only had a couple other changes with the Fury of Dead blog post that we had. The only other really notable one that I saw was they were adjusting the Tier 9 USS Georgia's ellipsis and sigma values a little bit. Now, they said that this was to compensate for the smaller guns. You'd think they would leave the sigma alone, but I guess if they shrunk the dispersion ellipsis, they would make it, more accurate or some such.
Wait, which ship did you say again?
The USS Georgia.
Interesting.
The Tier 9 U.S. battleship with the 2 gun turrets instead of the 3.
Right. I'm at a loss right now.
Oh yeah, it's the really, really, really low damage per minute battleship.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, I know. Going back to what you were saying about being overloaded with all the different stuff to test and topics.
Yeah, that one kind of just slipped through on me. Could you give me a little more of the stats on that one? I can't remember right now.
Yeah, so we've got, hold on, let me scroll to it. We got so many different tabs here. Actually, it only has the changes to, it doesn't talk about the stats that it had, but I'd have to go back on the dev post to an earlier when they initially talked about it. Now, I can't remember. I think this one had the 18-inch guns, but in the 2 turrets.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. Now I will say the photos that we've seen have been pretty cool from a camouflage perspective. I think they did a really good job on that. So I am excited to get my hands on this ship.
Yeah, I remember they talked about it a while ago, and it's like, yeah, I really do want to test this ship. I want to see what it's about, and it was one of those.
Oh, here it is. Not quite. You were wrong about the 18-inch guns, but it's got 16 inches, but the sigma looks to be 2.1, which that's kind of crazy right there. And a max speed of 35 knots for a battleship, but it's slow turning, so that's kind of weird.
Yeah, they said they basically were trying to make it a long-ranged fighter with the smaller number of guns and to designate its role as a far-range ship. They're interesting. I do really look forward to testing this, though.
Wait, what did you say, Zoup? 45 knots? I think you might be confusing the stats.
I said 35.
Okay, because, well...
Yeah, 45 knot battleship would be kind of crazy.
Yeah, so... Well, French ones, kind of close enough.
Yeah, close. Yeah.
Anyway, sure. I do believe they do have the 18-inch guns for 57. There's just 6 of them, and at least that's the numbers we saw early on. Perhaps they have changed it, although I kind of doubt it. And basically, she ends up being... I don't know. I think her damage output is going to be lacking because of the fewer number of guns, and it's probably not going to play too well because of that. It'll be kind of like a Scharnhorst. Sorry, not a Scharnhorst. A Gneisenau, except without the torpedoes and the amazing armor and the amazing anti-air. So I guess nothing like the Gneisenau.
Yeah, nothing like it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see because, I'm kind of thinking, if you stack that up against Missouri or Iowa, like per salvo, like what is the average, shells that you land with Iowa and Missouri? And if you take that number and then kind of export it over to Georgia, and if all of Georgia's shells hit, or, the same number of shells hit, but these are 18-inch, like... I don't know. I could see potential there, but honestly, yeah, you're probably definitely right, Aerroon. It's probably going to be like Gneisenau, where you get either you win the lottery or you don't.
Oh, and her shells will be like almost North Carolina speed, so that's going to be amazing.
Oh, here we go. Here's everything about it. Okay. 74,100 hit points, plating of 32 millimeters. Yeah, Sigma. Okay, it was 2.0, not 2.1. My mistake right there. My mistake. And maximum speed, I was going off the top of my head, 33 knots, not 35. So, yeah, she looks interesting. She looks very interesting.
Speaking of armor plating, though, I would like to read a few lines from one of the earlier ships we talked about, namely the Tier 8 French cruiser, the Bayard, or Bayard. Bayard? I don't know. The Japanese cruiser Yoshino, tier 10, hit points 61,800, plating 25 millimeters, central part 30 millimeters. So basically, it just says that the bow or the standard armor, which is the bow and aft and all that, is 25 millimeters, whereas the center is 30. Now, scrolling down to the Bayard, it says French cruiser Bayard, tier 8, hit points 34,700, plating 13 millimeters, central part 25. So we're talking about the tier 8 cruiser that has 13 millimeters of bow armor.
Okay. I got it. I'm sorry. I got to cut in here real quick. All right. So I think a lot was going on in my life when USS Georgia was released or the mentioned. I thought you all were going on with some awesome April Fool's joke just to kind of troll the viewers there. So I was making stats up about it that actually wound up being factual stats almost. So I'm sorry.
Wow.
I am laughing about this. I seriously thought you were like, I thought it was the end of the stream right now. We're just going to make up this ship, USS Georgia. And all the stats about it are fake and everything else. It just didn't sound real to me. And now that I'm looking at it online, it was posted back in February. Holy crap. And it's, oh my gosh, I feel so stupid right now, but this is hilarious. Oh, God.
I mean,
I just know you're trolling. I'm rolling along. Yeah, man. I heard it has 16-inch guns. It's going to go 35 knots, and it's got a 2.1 sigma. And lo and behold, I wasn't off that much from what they actually stated because I thought it was just so ridiculous to even put that out there. Oh my God.
Well, I'm glad we just made your day, Zoup. It was just recalling White Mouse's Thunderer.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about it. I'm like, oh, is this a Thunderer part 2? Oh God, it's been a long week.
Yeah, to touch real quick, Aerroon, I did notice that rather insane armor, if you will, on that French cruiser, and I'm kind of curious, really what it's gonna be like. It's gonna be interesting. That's a lot of armor on that facing.
Yeah, I mean, every single heavy cruiser you run into is going to be able to overmatch that bow. Yeah, I think interesting is the very nice way to put it.
And of course, Yamato and Musashi.
I think that might actually be an advantage, The armor is so thin that maybe the big shells will, I don't know, maybe it'll be like air for them, so it doesn't actually hurt the ship. It goes just clean through, a new speed hole, as a certain someone would put it.
A speed bump?
No, a speed hole. It makes the ship go faster.
No, I was saying for the shell.
I suppose, yes. I suppose it would actually distract the shell a little bit from its path towards the ground.
Well, silliness all aside, do either of you have anything that you would like to announce or add before we wrap up our show here?
Yeah, I don't know what to believe anymore. This last 10 minutes has just put reality into question right now. I'll wrap it up by saying there are a lot of awesome things on the horizon. The ships keep coming. We are knee deep in ship right now, which is awesome. So French destroyers next up to look forward to after Russian battleships come out. It's a great time to be playing World of Warships. Don't let the situation with CVs get you down. Wargaming's working on that, and there will be a fix. I mean, we'll get to a point where we might not have complete balance, but there'll be balance enough that I think players will be generally happy. So just thanks for having me out, everyone. I appreciate you all calling me out from the bullpen to come in and stand in for Kelorn today. It was a blast as always.
Yeah, you don't have to let the CV. You don't have to let yourself get pulled down by the CVs because they'll simply force you down with their HE die bombers.
Another Midway joke.
Yeah, so Zoup went down to Georgia looking for a troll to deal here.
Yeah, sure didn't I?
Well, on that note, we just want to thank our listeners. We want to thank our Patreons, especially give a big thank you to the community and to all the World of Warship players and wargaming enthusiasts who kind of keep this community going. And as Zoup was saying, there's a lot of changes. There's a lot of things going on. Wargaming knows this. They see all the numbers. We talk to the devs constantly, and they do hear you. They are just as concerned about the game, if not more so than we all are. And it just, keep enjoying the game, enjoy the community, and enjoy each other. And thank you so much for listening to the World of Warships podcast.